Welcome to Navy Paints. In this video I'll be showing you how I made and painted some heavily weathered industrial bases. These would be perfect for Necromunda, 40k or any other sci-fi tabletop game. Let's crack in. To make these bases it's super easy. All I used was my bases and some cheap dollar store clay plus some spare bits from my bits box. First thing I do is apply some of the clay to the base. Work it around the base until each part's about 1 to 2 millimeters thick. Using a rolling pin, I went over each base, making them as flat and level as possible. Then to put the texture on the base, I've gone through my bits box, found some random parts of plane wings, tanks and whatnot. Using these bits, I've carefully pushed them into the clay. To vary this up, I've used multiple bits on each base to create the different patterns. With that done, I'll let the bases dry overnight. To clean up the edges, I just used a hobby knife to cut away the excess. And to smooth off the edges, I just used a small file. On two of them, the clay didn't stick to the base. No big issue, I just put a bit of super glue down and glued it back on. You can leave the bases here and go straight to painting, but I've decided to add a few bits from my bits box to each base just to get a bit more character. And I've simply attached all these extra bits with a bit of super glue. Using a small bit of clay that's been dipped in water, I've applied it to the rim of each base, and using my finger to smooth it out, this will give the edges of the base a nice smooth finish. To give the bases some extra strength, I've mixed some PVA glue with water, and using an old paintbrush, I've just brushed this on. With the bases being built and dried now, I've gone over to Vallejo's black primer and undercoated them with this colour. I've run this through my airbrush and added a bit of flow improver also from Vallejo into the paint. I sprayed this on until each base had a nice even coverage. The main colour of the bases, I've decided to go with the Army Painter's Spaceship Exterior. This is applied again with my airbrush with a little bit of flow improver mixed in. And I've applied this until I had a nice even coverage again of this colour. The next step is applying Typhus Corrosion to the base. This will give the bases a nice rusty, grimy and weathered effect. I should have applied this before spraying the bases with the Spaceship Exterior. So if you do happen to follow this, just go with the Typhus Corrosion first and then go over the top with the Spaceship Exterior. This next step is to apply some colour and life to the bases. At the moment they just look super boring. So I've decided on 5 colours to keep it simple. These first 3 are all from the Army Painter. We've got Gunmetal, Uniform Grey and Deep Blue. The next 2 colours are from Vallejo. They are Pale Yellow and Black. All 5 of these colours were applied with 2 thin coats with a little water mixed into the paint, except for the gunmetal. I didn't add any water to that. Just to give the bases a little extra touch, I decided to add some numbers to the bases. Usually I'd make the stencils myself out of paper, but I couldn't be bothered this time. I wanted to try something else. So I found Vallejo had these stencils, I picked up a couple. The actual sheet is too big for what I wanted to use it for. So I just simply cut it down with a pair of scissors. The colour I used to put the numbers on was Vallejo's Black. Using the brush, the numbers didn't come out perfectly, but that's fine because we're going to weather the bases heavily anyway. If you want yours to be perfect and clear, I suggest using an airbrush. On to the next step, this is applying the weathering effect. I've gone with rough iron from the Amyu painter. I've applied this on with a sponge. To do this, just simply dip the sponge into the paint, dab a lot of the paint off the sponge. And the best way to use this is just to dab it on the corners and edges where a lot of weathering would take place. Also areas where people might be walking, these places would be a lot more weathered. With all the base coats down, now it's time for the oil wash. The three colours I've gone with are Ivory Black, Burnt Umber, and Permanent Green. These are all from Van Gogh, and I've mixed these in with some White Spirit from Winsor & Newton. I've mixed all three colours to make this disgusting brown, and I've applied this mix over the entire base. Then I've dried it out with a hairdryer for about 5 minutes on low setting, until the White Spirit had evaporated fully. Then let it sit for a further 10 minutes just to let the paint soak in a little bit more. Even though I've dried out the White Spirit, the paint is still playable. So when you start to remove the paint, it'll give you the bases a nice stained look and give it a nice effect of griminess and weathering. Now it's time to remove some of the oil paint off the top. The mix of oil I've gone with, it'll stain nicely and give the floor a really nice dirty, grimy look. Usually I'd use Q-tips to remove this oil. The Typhus Corrosion gives the base a nice gritty and rough effect. This just tears up the Q-tips or just makes it hard to roll it back and forward. So I've decided to use an old paintbrush here. Just dipped the paintbrush in the White Spirit and just started soaking up and removing some of the paint off the base. How much you remove is up to you. Also, you can move some of the paint around, so move it into the cracks and crevices. And I just keep doing this until I'm happy with the amount of oil paint I've removed. Once I was finished removing paint, I then used a hairdryer on low setting just to dry out the bases. I'd done this until the White Spirit had evaporated, and then the bases were ready for the next step. For the next step of weathering, I've gone to Vallejo's engine range. I've used two colours here. The first is Engine Grime, and the other one is Brown Engine Soot. When applying these colours, I like to vary it up, so sometimes straight from the pot, other times with a little water, other times with a lot of water. Just depending on what effect I'm going for, and varying it up like this will give you a better texture and appearance on the bases. Like all my weathering paints, I always like to add a little bit first and build it up slowly. Also during the weathering stage, I won't wait for the paints to dry fully before applying the other paints and letting them mix together. This gives me different colours on the bases, again, varying up the texture and look of the bases. For the big base, I want to put an oil leak coming out of the pipe. So I've done that by putting a hole in the pipe first. I've cut one of my paintbrush packages up and taken a little clear strip from it, then glued this into place using super glue. This will form the basis of the oil pouring out of the pipe and onto the floor. The next step is applying pigments to the bases. The two pigments I've gone with are Desert Dust from Vallejo and Medium Rust from MIG. So before applying the pigment, if you want it to stay permanently, you need to bind it. So I've gone with Vallejo's Pigment Binder. To do this, you need two brushes, one for the pigment binder and one for the dry pigments. So for the pigment binder, I just put it around the base where I want the pigment to stick. And then with another dry brush, I just take the pigment I want and just dab it into the place where I put the pigment binder. This will seal about 90% of the pigment to the base. Once the pigment binder had fully dried, I took a paintbrush and just dusted off any excess pigment off the top. This next step is to build up the oil coming out of the pipe and spilling onto the floor. This is Vallejo's water texture. This is the transparent version. To make sure the water's transparent at the end, you want to do it slowly and build it up over time. I've taken a little bit of the gel and applied it to the area I want the water effect to appear. So in this case, it's on that little plastic sheet I stuck down earlier and onto the floor around it. It says it takes about 12 hours to dry, but I left it for about 3. It started to go clear, and it was at least hard at this point. And I just slowly kept building it up over time, every say 3 hours, adding a little bit more and a little bit more each time. Then I let that dry for a full night, and when I woke up the next day, it was fully transparent. These next two colours are both from Vallejo. They're oil stains and petrol spills. So the first one of the two I laid down was the petrol spills. I applied this paint straight from the pot, And before it dried, then I switched over to the oil stains and applied that so the two colours would mix together nicely. Once I'd done that, I let them both dry and just reapplied, going back and forth between the two colours until I was happy with the stains and the variety I got. For the leak in the pipe, this was painted in the same way as the rest of the base, except it took a few more coats. The last thing I did was paint the rim of the base with Abaddon Black from Citadel. This required 2 coats, and with that, they're ready to be mounted with the model. And here they are, waiting for some maintenance from the Mechanicus. Thanks for watching Nephew Paints. If you liked the video, please click the sub button or leave me a like. If there's anything you'd like to see in a future video, please leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next one. Catch ya.